Well, I think it was founded to provide very much needed support for the arts across the country. And I think the impulse, and you saw it in those early years at the end of the 1960s, was to provide funding that was for arts organizations that was outside of the marketplace. That arts organizations didn't have to take my field, the theater, that a resident theater wouldn't have to depend solely on its box office, on its commercial viability to survive. It was a way to find support for the arts that wasn't contingent on the marketplace. One of the aspects of an NEA grant is that they're awarded on the basis of artistic merit and access to the arts. There's nothing said about the prospect for the work of art to make money or to become popular. It was a way to subsidize the arts for their own sake, outside of the exigencies of the marketplace, and that was very important at the time when the resident theater movement, which that was part of my upbringing really, came out of an effort by the Ford Foundation and the NEA to support resident not-for-profit theaters that didn't have to depend on having a commercial hit to succeed. Well, my background, my career has been in the theater, in the commercial theater. I was a theatrical producer and theater owner. My company owned 5 Broadway theaters, and so that was my main area of interest. And I saw it was very obvious to anybody working in the arts the importance of the NEA to the arts. My own company, the company I was affiliated with, Dodger Productions, got its start when it was a not-for-profit theater group, and it began with funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. You see this in so many places that careers began with NEA funding. There was an obituary in the New York Times yesterday of Vivian Ayers Allen, who's the mother of Felicia Rashad and Debbie Allen and Tex Allen. She had a long career. She died at 102. She had a long career as an artist, an arts activist, and it began with a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And there are tens of thousands of examples of this, of people whose career and work began with an NEA grant. And I was aware of that, and I was aware of the importance of the NEA. And when I had a chance to lead the agency, I took it. Well, when I came in, I was of course determined that artistic merit should be first and foremost in our grant making. And I remember making a statement saying that the theater in Peoria, Illinois, is not going to be as important as the Goodman in Chicago. And of course, the people in Peoria were in an uproar and a fury, and I got lots of letters and phone calls, and eventually went to Peoria and became great friends with all of the artists and theater practitioners there. But the point being that the access part of it is just as important as the artistic merit part of it. The NEA has funded in every congressional district all over the country, and that's an important part of its mandate. The rich philanthropists tend to be clustered on the coasts. Many of the arts granting foundations are specific to particular areas. The McKnight Foundation funds in Minnesota. The Irving Foundation funds in California. The NEA is truly a national funding organization. It funds everywhere, and it funds in places where there aren't other avenues to receive support. There aren't other funders. One of the biggest supporters and protectors of the NEA was my good friend Mike Simpson, a congressman from Idaho, and he has said that what's important is the funding in places that wouldn't otherwise have access to arts funding, and the NEA funds in rural places all across the country, in small towns, inner cities, everywhere, where there's not necessarily easy access to arts funding, and that's an important part of its mandate. Well, I came in with the idea of, how can we sell the NEA? How can we increase support for it all across the country and all across the political spectrum? And one obvious way was to make the connection between the arts and the economy, the arts and community development, the arts and the social fabric of places everywhere. That the arts could have a tremendous impact in the revitalization of communities. That both the economics and the civic connections could be greatly enhanced by the presence of arts. And there are so many examples of this across the country. You'll find Cincinnati is a good example, where there's the Over the Rhine area in Cincinnati that was basically an arena for police action, drug dealing and prostitution and all kinds of crime, and then an art gallery opened there, and then a small theater, and little by little, as it became more of an arts district, that had and people would go, and you'd get foot traffic, and you'd get people attending arts events and shows. That transformed the neighborhood. It became a completely different neighborhood. And the arts have the ability to do this, to revitalize places. And that was really the message I was delivering. And Art Place is really an extension of that. That was my attempt to carry this outside the NEA into philanthropy all across the country. And we convened the 7 major arts funding organizations in the country. You know them: Bloomberg, Ford, Kresge, McKnight, Knight, Cargill, all of the big arts funding foundations. Mellon. We got them together in a room at a meeting hosted by the Ford Foundation, and I convinced them to form a new entity, a new organization that we called Art Place, that basically continued the NEA Our Town program, which was about putting public art into communities, into towns and cities, and using engagement with the arts to make those places better, to make them more vital, more economically viable, stronger civic connections there. And Art Place was really an extension of the work of the NEA into the private sector, and Jamie Bennett ran it, and it lasted for 10 years, and I think had a very, very profound impact. Well, the NEA has a lot of. We'll have to talk to Sunil Iyengar to provide more of the specifics, but we have a lot of data that shows that introducing the arts into schools when kids are very young, and having arts education in the schools has a profound impact on the success of those kids. Those kids do better on getting into better schools, are earning higher salaries when they graduate, connecting with their communities. Truancy drops, juvenile delinquency drops. And there are a lot of examples about how arts education can really transform outcomes for kids. And the NEA has a lot of research and a lot of data on how that works. But we basically went all over the country, trying to using the Our Town program, using Art Place, putting arts into communities, and the effects on that, the results were exciting, were profound. I talked about the importance of arts subsidy and how important that is. I also talked about the importance of having national funding for the arts, which is what the NEA does. It's also important that support, both in the support for the NEA and in the granting the support that the NEA gives, the grant making that it does, that it be not so much bipartisan as unpartisan. One of the things I think that every NEA chair is proud of is the degree to which the NEA has gone out to every community, every congressional district across the country, so many communities, without any regard to the politics of it. Mike Simpson happened to be a Republican. Barbara McCollum was a Democrat. It never occurred to any of us what the politics were. We had a council. To this day, I couldn't tell you the politics of the different members of our council at the NEA. So there's a tremendous history there of bipartisanship or unpartisanship, which I think is very important to the funding for the arts. It's also very important, I think, to the country to make a statement that support for the arts doesn't go according to party affiliation. That's tremendously important. And what we're seeing now, I think, is to some degree a politicization of arts funding and arts support, and I think that is a tragedy. I think art. It's not only that art it transcends politics; it's that it I think makes the politics of all of this less important as people start to communicate with each other and bond and engage in common purposes. I think that's something that the arts can do. So any attempt to politicize it, to say that this is some special this belongs to the coastal elites or to rich people or anything like that. The whole history of the NEA is that it's exactly the opposite of that. That it's a subsidy, takes it out of the commercial realm. That it's national. It's not just on the coasts, and that it's not partisan. I think that's been a critical aspect of the NEA, and every NEA chair, I think, has been very proud of that aspect of our funding. Well, I think the NEA's had I think probably more than 9 lives. It's always been under siege in one way or another in the political arena. It is still extant. It has survived. It's continuing to fund, and I look forward to future growth and influence from the NEA. I think that's going to happen, and still alive, still kicking, and I think there's a great future for the NEA. My career started in the non-commercial theater at the Yale School of Drama and ended up on Broadway. If you look at Broadway shows, especially plays, I would say 95% of the work has had some kind of beginning at a not-for-profit theater, a subsidized theater. Most obviously, Hamilton, one of the biggest commercial successes in the history of Broadway, began at the public theater. There's so many. Chorus Line began at the public theater, a not-for-profit venue. There's so many examples in the commercial theater of works that started in a protected environment, and sometimes you need a protected environment. You need to be able to do your work with total safety, that you can experiment, that you can take chances, that you can be bold, and not be thinking all the time about, is this going to sell? There's no aspect of an NEA grant that asks the question, is this going to sell? Is this going to be popular? And the not-for-profit theater and the not-for-profit arts organizations generally, and all the other arts too, you need that subsidy, you need that safe space to be able to work. The commercial aspect may or may not develop later. Yes, the commercial theater, the Broadway theater, is very beholden to the not-for-profit theater for its work. But even if it weren't, you would still want subsidy for that work to be able to be created. So many people say, well, if the arts are so important, just leave it to the marketplace to fund. The marketplace will take care of all of that. Well, there's some things that are so important that we don't just leave them to the marketplace. We don't just say, let the marketplace take care of the national parks or the national defense. Arts are something fundamental to who we are, fundamental to our humanity. And we need art that is protected from the demands of the marketplace, of whether it's going to make money or not. Maybe it'll make money much later. Maybe it'll never make money. But we need an environment for the creation of art, for people working on the art, that is safe and protected, and only subsidy can provide that. So it's not something to be left to the marketplace, and that's the whole point. One of the reasons the Ford Foundation and the NEA basically built the not-for-profit theater sector, the resident theater movement, was to free the theater from having to have a Broadway hit every time they put on a show. That's critically important. You can't just leave it up to the marketplace. The marketplace won't do the job. It'll do, a part of the job. The funders do tend to be clustered on the coasts where they're located. You don't have a lot of major funders in Iowa and Oklahoma and Missouri and so forth. So geographically, the funders aren't equally distributed, and the individual private funders tend to have agendas. The Ford Foundation now, much to my deep regret, is funding in one area, inequality. The Ford Foundation has decided that this is their theme, and this is how they're going to fund. So if you've written a play and your play does not have a social justice theme, forget about applying to the Ford Foundation for support. You're not going to get it. The individual foundations have their own agendas. The NEA doesn't have anything like that. They are funding for artistic merit and access to the arts, and that's on a nationwide basis. It's not particular to the coast. It's not particular to areas where the foundations are funding, and it's not particular to the individual agendas that various foundations and various individuals, private individuals, rich individuals, may have. That's critically important. We need an organization that is outside of the so-called private sector that can do this kind of funding.